The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in September of 1882, and Sarah Preston knew, before opening it, that her life was about to shatter into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the thin paper, her eyes scanning the brief, brutal words that confirmed what her heart had been whispering for weeks. Thomas was dead, killed in a mining accident outside Silver City, 300 miles away, his body already buried in ground too hard and unforgiving to ever give him back to her. Sarah stood in the doorway of the small house she had shared with Thomas for only 8 months of marriage, watching the dust devils spin across the main street of Tonopah, Nevada, and felt the weight of 22 years pressed down on her shoulders like the hand of God himself. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a vast emptiness that mirrored the hollow space opening up inside her chest. Thomas had promised he would return in 6 weeks, that the mining work would pay enough to buy them a real start in life, maybe even a small ranch where they could raise cattle and children and grow old together, watching the sunsets paint the sky. Instead, she held a piece of paper that reduced all those dreams to ash and memory. The women of Tonopah came to her with casseroles and sympathy, their faces kind but their eyes holding that peculiar mixture of pity and relief that she had seen before, the look that said, "Thank God it was not my husband this time." Sarah accepted their offerings with quiet grace, sitting in her parlor as they spoke in hushed tones about the will of the Lord and the mysterious ways of providence. But inside, she felt herself hardening like clay left too long in the desert sun. She was alone now, truly alone, with no family to return to and barely enough money saved to last through the winter. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of grief and practicality. Sarah took in sewing and laundry, her fingers working until they bled, mending shirts for miners and ranchers who brought their clothes to her back door and paid in coins that clinked heavily in her apron pocket. She learned to smile when customers came, to ask about their families and their work, to present a face to the world that suggested she was managing, that she was healing, even as she lay awake each night listening to the wind howl across the desert and wondering how long a person could survive on memories alone. 3 months passed. Winter settled over Tonopah with surprising ferocity, bringing winds that rattled the windows and temperatures that dropped so low Sarah had to break ice in her water basin each morning. She had sold most of Thomas's belongings to pay for firewood and food, keeping only his pocket watch and the leather journal where he had written her small poems and observations about the world. Sometimes she opened that journal and read his words by candlelight, tracing the loops and curves of his handwriting as though touching the ink might somehow bring him back to her. It was on a particularly bitter morning in December when she heard the knock at her door. Sarah set down the shirt she had been mending and crossed the small room, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders before opening the door to reveal a tall man standing on her porch, his hat in his hands and snow dusting the shoulders of his heavy coat. He had dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds, and when he looked at her, there was something in his expression that made her heart skip a beat, though whether from fear or something else entirely she could not say. "Mrs. Preston," he said, his voice low and respectful. "My name is Cole Henley. I wonder if I might have a moment of your time." Sarah studied him for a long moment, noting the quality of his boots and the way he held himself with a quiet confidence that suggested he was used to being listened to. "What is this regarding, Mr. Henley?" "Your husband, madam, Thomas Preston. I was with him when he died." The world seemed to tilt slightly, and Sarah gripped the doorframe to steady herself. She had received the telegram, had mourned and tried to move forward, but the idea that someone who had actually been there, who had seen Thomas in his final moments, was standing on her porch was almost more than she could process. "Come in," she said finally, stepping back to allow him entry. "Please." Cole Henley entered her small home with the careful movements of a large man conscious of his size in a confined space. He waited until she gestured to a chair before sitting, placing his hat on his knee and looking at her with those steady gray eyes. "I apologize for coming unannounced, Mrs. Preston. I have been trying to work up the courage to visit you for some time now." "Tell me what happened," Sarah said, lowering herself into the chair opposite him. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Please." "I received only a telegram saying there had been an accident." Cole drew in a long breath and then began to speak, his words careful and measured. He explained that he had been working as a foreman at the mine outside Silver City, that Thomas had been part of a crew digging a new shaft when the support beams gave way. The collapse had been sudden and catastrophic, trapping 4 men beneath tons of rock and earth. Cole himself had been part of the rescue effort, digging with his bare hands until they were bloody, but by the time they reached Thomas and the others it was already too late. "He did not suffer long," Cole said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I want you to know that. He spoke of you at the end. He asked me to tell you that he was sorry, that he loved you more than life itself, and that his only regret was leaving you alone." Tears streamed down Sarah's face, but she made no move to wipe them away. "Thank you for telling me. I know it cannot have been easy to come here." "There is more," Cole said, and something in his tone made Sarah look up sharply. "Thomas gave me something before he died. He made me promise to bring it to you personally, to make sure you were managing, to help you if you needed it." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather pouch, placing it on the table between them. "He had been saving his wages to surprise you. There is nearly $300 here." Sarah stared at the pouch as though it might bite her. $300 was a fortune, more money than she had ever seen in one place in her entire life. It was enough to live on for years if she was careful, enough to perhaps start the ranch Thomas had dreamed of, enough to change everything. "I do not understand," she whispered. "Why would you travel 300 miles in winter just to bring me this? You could have sent it by post or kept it for yourself, and I would never have known." Cole was quiet for a moment, his fingers turning his hat in slow circles on his knee. "Because I made a promise to a dying man, Mrs. Preston, and because I have seen what happens to women left alone in towns like this. Thomas asked me to make sure you were all right, and I intend to honor that request." Something in his voice, a gentle determination that brooked no argument, made Sarah believe him. She looked at Cole Henley properly for the first time, taking in the strong lines of his face, the calluses on his hands that spoke of years of hard labor. The way he met her gaze directly without the sideways glances some men gave widows, as though grief had made her something to be pitied or preyed upon. "That is very kind of you, Mr. Henley. I am managing as best I can. The money will help tremendously." "I am glad to hear it," Cole said, rising to his feet. "If you will permit me, I would like to check on you from time to time to make sure you have everything you need. I have taken a job at one of the silver mines here in Tanapa, so I will be in town for the foreseeable future." Sarah stood as well, suddenly aware of how small her home must seem to this man who carried himself with such quiet authority. "You came all this way and changed your plans just to keep a promise to a stranger." "Thomas Preston was not a stranger," Cole replied, his voice soft. "In the 2 weeks I knew him, he talked about you every single day. He showed me the letters you wrote him, read me passages about your life together. By the time he died, I felt as though I knew you too. And when a man asks you to look after the woman he loves more than his own life, you do not take that responsibility lightly. Sarah felt fresh tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. I do not know what to say, Mr. Henley. You do not need to say anything, madam. I will leave you in peace now, but if you need anything at all, you can find me at the Lucky Strike Mine or boarding at Mrs. Callahan's house on 3rd Street. He settled his hat on his head and moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. One more thing, Mrs. Preston. Thomas made me promise something else before he died. He made me promise that I would not leave you waiting, that I would check on you regularly and make sure you knew you were not alone in the world. I intend to keep that promise, if you will allow it. Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice, and watched as Cole Henley stepped out into the cold December morning and walked away down her path, his broad shoulders disappearing into the swirling snow. When he was gone, she closed the door and leaned against it, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened. The leather pouch sat on her table like a small miracle, a final gift from the husband she had loved and lost, delivered by a stranger who had traveled 300 miles through winter just to keep a promise. The weeks that followed took on a strange new rhythm. Cole Henley proved true to his word, stopping by Sarah's home every few days to check on her, always respectful, always careful to observe the proprieties that governed interactions between unmarried men and widowed women. He brought her firewood when he noticed her supply running low, and when a pipe froze and burst in her kitchen, he spent an entire Sunday afternoon fixing it, refusing any payment beyond a cup of coffee and a slice of the apple pie she had baked that morning. Sarah found herself looking forward to his visits with an eagerness that both surprised and troubled her. It had only been 4 months since Thomas died, and she still wore her black mourning dress every day, still felt the weight of loss pressing down on her heart. Yet there was something about Cole's quiet presence that eased the loneliness that had become her constant companion. He never spoke of romance or impropriety, never looked at her with anything but respect and genuine concern, yet she found herself noticing things about him. The way he smiled when she said something that amused him, the strength in his hands as he worked, the kindness in his eyes when he asked about her well-being. One evening in late January, as they sat in her small parlor drinking coffee and talking about nothing in particular, Sarah found herself asking the question that had been nagging at her for weeks. Why did you really come here, Cole? And please do not tell me it was only to keep a promise. 300 miles in winter is a long way to travel for a man you barely knew. Cole set down his coffee cup and was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I was the foreman of that mine, Sarah. It was my responsibility to make sure the shafts were properly supported, that the men working under me were safe. When that collapse happened, when I pulled Thomas and those other men out of the rubble and realized they were gone, I felt as though I had failed in the most fundamental way a man can fail. Your husband died on my watch, and I will carry that weight for the rest of my life. Sarah felt her heart constrict. It was not your fault, Cole. Accidents happen in mines. Everyone knows the risks. Knowing that in my head and feeling it in my heart are two different things, Cole said, meeting her eyes. When Thomas asked me to look after you, to make sure you were not left waiting and wondering, it felt like a chance at redemption. A way to honor his memory by doing right by the woman he loved. So I came to Tanapa and I found you, and I made a commitment to myself that I would keep my promise no matter what it took. And have you found your redemption? Sarah asked softly. Cole smiled, a sad, gentle expression that transformed his features. I have found something, though I am not sure redemption is the right word for it. I have found a purpose, I suppose, a reason to get up each morning that goes beyond simply existing. Sarah understood that feeling all too well. The past weeks, as Cole had become a regular presence in her life, she had noticed her own grief beginning to shift and change, not disappearing but rather making room for other emotions. Gratitude, companionship, and something deeper that she was not yet ready to name. "I am glad you came," she said finally. "I was so alone, Cole. I was drowning in silence and sorrow, and I did not know how to save myself. You threw me a rope when I needed it most." "You would have found your way without me," Cole said. "You are stronger than you know, Sarah Preston." "Perhaps," Sarah said, "but it is easier to be strong when you are not alone." As winter gave way to spring, the nature of their relationship began to shift in subtle but unmistakable ways. Cole still came to visit regularly, but now, Sarah found herself preparing special meals when she knew he was coming, taking extra care with her appearance, changing out of her black mourning dress into softer grays and deep purples that acknowledged her loss while suggesting she was ready to begin living again. Cole noticed these changes. She could tell from the way his eyes lingered on her face, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name. They began taking walks together on Sunday afternoons, strolling through Tanapa's dusty streets and out into the desert beyond, where wildflowers were beginning to bloom in brilliant splashes of color against the brown earth. Cole told her stories about his life, about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about heading west at 17 to seek his fortune in the silver mines, about the years of hard work and harder lessons that had shaped him into the man he was. Sarah shared her own history, speaking of her childhood in a small town in Kansas, of meeting Thomas at a church social when she was 19, of their whirlwind courtship and marriage, of the dreams they had shared for their future together. "Do you think Thomas would approve of us spending time together?" Sarah asked one afternoon as they sat on a large boulder watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Cole considered the question seriously. "I think Thomas wanted you to be happy, Sarah. I think that is why he asked me to look after you. He knew he was dying, and he knew what would happen to you if you were left completely alone. He trusted me to do right by you, and I hope I have been." "You have been more than I could have ever asked for," Sarah said, her voice catching. "But I find myself feeling guilty sometimes, Cole. Thomas has only been gone 6 months, and already I find myself thinking thoughts that a proper widow should not think. I find myself looking forward to your visits, counting the days between them, feeling disappointed when you have to leave. And I wonder if that makes me a terrible person." Cole reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. It was the first time he had touched her beyond helping her over rough ground or handing her down from a wagon, and the contact sent a jolt of electricity through her entire body. "It makes you human, Sarah. It makes you a woman who has suffered a terrible loss and is trying to find her way back to the light. There is no shame in that, no dishonor to Thomas's memory." "How can you be so sure?" Sarah whispered, her eyes searching his face. "Because I knew him," Cole said simply, "and because I know you. Thomas loved you enough to spend his dying breaths making sure you would be cared for. That is not the action of a man who would want his wife to spend the rest of her life alone and grieving. He wanted you to live, Sarah. He wanted you to be happy. And if I can play some small part in making that happen, then I will count myself the most fortunate man alive." Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of permission, of hope beginning to bloom in the devastated garden of her heart. "I care for you, Cole," she said, her voice barely audible over the evening breeze. "I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone again, but I care for you so much it frightens me." Cole's hand tightened around hers. I care for you too, Sarah. I have cared for you since the first moment I saw you standing in that doorway, so brave and so broken all at once. I told myself it was just about keeping a promise, about honoring Thomas's last wish, but the truth is I fell in love with you somewhere along the way. I fell in love with your strength, your kindness, the way you smile when you think no one is watching, the way you have rebuilt your life piece by piece, even when it would have been easier to give up. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever known, and I would be honored if you would allow me to court you properly. Sarah turned to look at him fully, seeing the vulnerability in his face, the fear and hope warring in his eyes. This man who had traveled 300 miles to keep a promise to a dying stranger, who had spent months earning her trust and friendship without asking for anything in return, who had somehow found a way to honor her past while offering her a future. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, Cole Henley. I would like that very much." Cole smiled then, a genuine expression of joy that transformed his entire face, and Sarah felt something inside her chest that had been frozen solid for months finally begin to thaw. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture so tender and respectful that she felt herself falling even deeper into love with this good, honorable man who had appeared in her life when she needed him most. They walked back to town as the stars began to emerge overhead, their hands still clasped, and Sarah felt as though she was stepping across a threshold into a new chapter of her life. The grief was still there, would probably always be there in some form, but it no longer defined her entire existence. Thomas would want this for her, she realized. Thomas had made sure she would not be left waiting and wondering, had sent Cole to her like a final act of love from beyond the grave. And now it was time to honor that gift by choosing to live fully again. The courtship that followed was sweet and slow, and everything Sarah had not known she needed. Cole was patient and gentle, never pushing her beyond what she was ready for, content to spend hours simply talking or sitting in companionable silence. He brought her wildflowers picked from the desert, small treasures that she arranged in jars on her windowsill. He taught her to ride properly, taking her out on a gentle mare he borrowed from his employer and showing her how to move with the horse's rhythm, how to feel the power and grace of the animal beneath her. She baked him his favorite foods and mended his clothes, small acts of service that felt natural and right. The people of Tanapa watched their courtship with interest and, for the most part, approval. Sarah had been well-liked even before Thomas's death, and the fact that she had waited a respectable amount of time before allowing herself to move forward earned her the respect of even the most traditional members of the community. Cole, too, had made a good impression, earning a reputation as a hard worker and an honest man, someone who could be relied upon to keep his word and do right by those around him. In May, nearly 8 months after Thomas's death and 6 months after Cole had first knocked on her door, Sarah invited him to dinner and announced that she was ready to remove her mourning clothes permanently. She wore a dress of pale blue cotton, the first color she had allowed herself in nearly a year, and when Cole saw her, his face lit up with such obvious admiration that she felt herself blushing like a girl half her age. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Like springtime itself." "I feel as though I am being reborn," Sarah admitted, smoothing her hands over the soft fabric. "As though I am finally ready to step fully into this new life. And I could not have done it without you, Cole. You kept your promise. You did not leave me waiting. You showed me that it was possible to honor the past while still embracing the future." Cole crossed the room to her, stopping close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Sarah Preston," he said, his gray eyes searching hers. "I know it has not been long, and I know the world might say we should wait longer still, but I am not a patient man when it comes to things that matter. I love you. I love you with everything I am and everything I hope to be. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy, giving you all the dreams you and Thomas talked about, building something real and lasting together. Will you marry me?" Sarah's heart felt as though it might burst from her chest. She had known this moment was coming, had thought about her answer during the long nights when sleep eluded her, had examined her feelings from every possible angle. What she felt for Cole was different from what she had felt for Thomas, but it was no less real, no less powerful. Thomas had been her first love, the boy who had swept her off her feet with poetry and promises. Cole was something else entirely. A man forged in fire and hardship, who had chosen her with clear eyes and a commitment that went beyond mere passion. He was steady and strong and true, and she loved him with a depth that sometimes took her breath away. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing clear and certain. "Yes, Cole, I will marry you. I will build a life with you and grow old with you and love you for all the days I have left on this earth." Cole let out a whoop of joy and caught her up in his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and breathless, clutching at his shoulders for balance. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her for the first time, a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Sarah melted into him, feeling the last walls around her heart finally crumble away, leaving her open and vulnerable and more alive than she had felt in longer than she could remember. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church at the center of Tonopah, with half the town in attendance to witness their vows. Sarah wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she had sewn herself, and Cole wore a new suit purchased specially for the occasion, his dark hair neatly combed and his face shining with happiness. As they stood before the minister and promised to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives, Sarah felt Thomas's presence like a benediction, a gentle whisper in her heart that said this was right, this was good, this was exactly what he had wanted for her. After the ceremony, there was a celebration in the town square with music and dancing and food, contributed by dozens of neighbors and friends. Sarah danced with Cole until her feet ached, laughing as he spun her through the steps of reels and waltzes, his strong arms keeping her secure even when she stumbled. When the sun finally set and the stars emerged overhead, they slipped away from the festivities and walked hand in hand to the small house that had once been Sarah's alone, but was now theirs together. Cole carried her over the threshold, another kiss sealing their union, and as Sarah looked around the familiar room, she felt the weight of the past year finally lift from her shoulders. She had survived the worst thing she could imagine, had walked through the valley of shadow and emerged on the other side changed, but not broken. And she had not done it alone. Cole had been there every step of the way, keeping his promise, refusing to let her drown in her grief, offering her a hand to hold and a heart to trust. That night, as they lay together in the darkness with Cole's arms wrapped around her and his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Sarah whispered, "Thank you for not leaving me waiting. Thank you for being the man Thomas knew you would be." Cole pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for letting me love you. Thank you for being brave enough to take a chance on happiness again. I promise you, Sarah, I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret this decision." "I could never regret this," Sarah said softly. "You are the answer to a prayer I did not even know I was praying. You are my second chance, my new beginning, my future." The years that followed were everything Sarah and Cole had hoped for and more. With the money Thomas had saved and the wages Cole earned at the mine, they were able to purchase a small piece of land just outside Tonopah. 40 acres of desert that seemed barren and impossible to most people but held infinite potential in their eyes. They built a house together, Cole doing most of the heavy construction while Sarah planned the layout and painted the walls and sewed curtains for the windows. They bought cattle, starting with just a dozen head and slowly building a herd through careful management and hard work. Sarah discovered she had a talent for ranching that surprised them both. She learned to rope and brand, to recognize signs of illness in the animals, to manage the books, and keep track of expenses and profits. Cole treated her as a true partner in their enterprise, valuing her opinions and trusting her judgment, never assuming that he knew better simply because he was a man. Together they built something real and lasting, a ranch that grew and prospered even in the harsh desert environment. In the spring of 1884, nearly 2 years after their wedding, Sarah realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mixture of joy and fear, remembering the baby she and Thomas had lost early in their marriage, terrified that history might repeat itself. But Cole was there through every moment of worry and discomfort, holding her hand during the difficult pregnancy, reassuring her when the fear became overwhelming, making her laugh when the weight of it all threatened to crush her spirit. Their son was born on a cold November morning, entering the world with a lusty cry that announced his presence to everyone within hearing distance. They named him James Thomas Henley, honoring both the man who had brought them together and the promise of new life and new beginnings. Cole wept when he held his son for the first time, and Sarah fell in love with him all over again, watching the tender way he cradled the tiny infant, the awe and wonder on his face as he counted fingers and toes and marveled at the miracle they had created together. James was followed by a daughter 2 years later, whom they named Elizabeth Ann, and then another son, Daniel Cole, 2 years after that. Their house filled with noise and laughter, and the chaos of family life, and Sarah sometimes had to stop and catch her breath at how completely her life had transformed. There were still moments when she thought of Thomas, when she wondered what her life might have been like if he had returned from that mine as promised, but those moments no longer carried the sharp edge of grief. Instead, they were bittersweet acknowledgments of a road not taken, a life that might have been but was not meant to be. Cole understood her occasional melancholy and never tried to compete with Thomas's memory. Instead, he honored it, telling their children stories about the brave man who had died in a mine collapse and used his last breaths to make sure their mother would be cared for. The man who had asked Cole to promise he would not leave her waiting and wondering. As the children grew, they came to understand that their family had been born from both tragedy and love, that the father who raised them and loved them had done so in part to honor another man's dying wish. The ranch continued to prosper. By 1890, they had expanded to 200 acres and employed 3 ranch hands to help with the work. Cole had long since left the mines, preferring the open air and honest work of ranching to the dark, dangerous tunnels underground. Sarah ran the household with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything, managing not just their growing family, but also serving as the ranch's bookkeeper, and sometimes even its nurse when the hands got injured or sick. They became pillars of the Tanapa community, known for their generosity and their willingness to help neighbors in need. When drought struck one summer and several smaller ranchers lost most of their herds, Cole and Sarah extended credit and shared their water resources, asking for nothing in return. When the school needed a new roof, they donated both money and labor, with Cole leading the construction crew and Sarah organizing the women to provide meals. They lived their values openly and honestly, treating everyone with respect regardless of their station in life. and in turn, they were respected and admired by all who knew them. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1893, Cole took Sarah on a trip to San Francisco, their first real vacation since their wedding. They left the children with trusted friends and spent 2 glorious weeks exploring the city, attending plays and concerts, dining in fine restaurants, and staying in a hotel so luxurious that Sarah felt like a queen. On their last night, as they stood on the balcony of their room looking out over the glittering city, Cole pulled her into his arms and said, "I want you to know something, Sarah. I want you to know that every single day I spend with you is a gift I never expected to receive. When I made that promise to Thomas when I traveled to Tanapa to deliver his savings and check on his widow, I never imagined I would find the love of my life. But that is exactly what happened. You are my heart, Sarah Henley. You are my home. And I thank God every day that Thomas trusted me with your care, because it led me to the greatest happiness I have ever known." Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks as she looked up at this man who had kept his promise so completely, who had refused to leave her waiting, who had loved her through grief and healing and the building of a beautiful life together. "You are my miracle, Cole. You appeared when I had given up hope, and you showed me that it was possible to love again, to dream again, to build something beautiful from the ashes of loss. I love you more than words can express, and I will love you until my dying breath and beyond." They kissed as the lights of San Francisco sparkled below them. 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had chosen to build a life together based on trust, respect, and a love that had grown deeper and stronger with each passing year. When they returned to Tanapa, they threw themselves back into the rhythms of ranch life with renewed energy. James, now 9 years old, was already showing signs of following in his father's footsteps, spending every free moment working alongside Cole and learning the intricacies of cattle ranching. Elizabeth, at 7, was more interested in books and learning, spending hours poring over the small collection of volumes Sarah had accumulated over the years. Daniel, at 5, was still young enough to be interested in everything and nothing, flitting from one activity to another with the boundless energy of early childhood. Sarah loved watching Cole with their children, seeing the patience and tenderness he brought to fatherhood. He taught James to ride and rope, with the same careful instruction he had once given Sarah, never getting frustrated when the boy made mistakes, always ready with encouragement and praise for improvement. He read to Elizabeth every night, his deep voice bringing the stories to life, discussing the books with her as though she were an adult whose opinions mattered. And he played endless games with Daniel, building forts, and having pretend gunfights and giving horsey rides until his back ached, but never complaining about the demands on his time and energy. In the fall of 1895, Sarah's world tilted on its axis once again, though this time with joy rather than sorrow. She discovered she was pregnant with their 4th child, a surprise given that Daniel was now 7, and she had assumed their family was complete. Cole was delighted, swinging her around much as he had on the day she agreed to marry him, and the children were excited at the prospect of a new baby brother or sister. The pregnancy was easier than her previous ones, and Sarah sailed through the months with energy and good humor. Their daughter arrived in May of 1896, a tiny perfect thing with Cole's gray eyes and Sarah's dark hair. They named her Grace Mary, and from the moment she drew her first breath, she wrapped the entire family around her little finger. James, Elizabeth, and Daniel doted on their baby sister, fighting over who got to hold her and help care for her. And Cole declared that Grace was his reward for being the best father in Nevada. As the century drew to a close, the Henley Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the region. They now ran 500 head of cattle across 400 acres, employed a dozen hands, and had built a reputation for producing high-quality beef that commanded premium prices in markets as far away as San Francisco and Denver. Sarah and Cole had achieved everything they had dreamed of and more, building not just a successful business but a legacy they could pass down to their children. Yet success had not changed them. They remained the same kind, generous people they had always been, quick to help neighbors and slow to judge others. Cole still worked alongside his ranch hands, never asking them to do anything he would not do himself. And Sarah still took in sewing for women in town who could not afford store-bought clothes, refusing payment but accepting friendship in return. On a warm evening in June of 1899, as they sat on the porch of their ranch house watching their children play in the yard, Sarah said, "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if you had not kept your promise? If you had just sent that money by post and gone on with your life?" Cole reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in the familiar gesture that had become second nature over the years. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "I think about all the things I would have missed if I had made that choice. I would have missed knowing you, loving you, building this life with you. I would have missed watching our children grow and thrive. I would have missed every single moment of happiness and purpose and belonging that has defined my existence for the past 17 years. Keeping that promise was the best decision I ever made, Sarah. It led me to everything that matters." Sarah squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar surge of love and gratitude that still swept through her whenever she looked at this man who had become her everything. "Thomas knew," she said softly. "Somehow, even in his final moments, he knew that you were the right person to send to me. He knew you would not leave me waiting. He knew you would keep your promise and more. And in doing so, he gave me the greatest gift imaginable. He gave me you. I like to think we are both honoring his memory by living well and loving fully," Cole said. "By building something beautiful and lasting, by raising good children who will make their own mark on the world, by treating each other and those around us with kindness and respect. That seems like the best way to honor a promise made to a dying man." Sarah nodded, leaning her head against Cole's shoulder and watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. James was teaching Daniel how to throw a rope, his movements patient and sure, so much like Cole that it made her heart ache. Elizabeth was reading to Grace under a tree, the 4-year-old listening with rapt attention even though she probably understood only half the words. This was her life now, full and rich and blessed beyond measure. The grief that had once threatened to destroy her had been transformed into something else, woven into the fabric of who she was but no longer defining her entire existence. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing children. James married at 22, bringing home a sweet-natured girl named Anna who fit into the family as though she had always been there. Elizabeth went away to school in San Francisco, determined to become a teacher, and returned 3 years later with a degree and a passionate desire to educate the children of Tanapa. Daniel proved to have a gift for horse training, building a reputation that brought clients from across the state. And Grace, the baby of the family, grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's compassion and her father's strength of character. Through it all, Sarah and Cole remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. They weathered droughts and economic downturns, celebrated births and mourned deaths, supported their children through triumphs and heartbreaks, and loved each other with a constancy that never wavered. They were partners in the truest sense of the word, equals who had built something remarkable together through hard work, dedication, and a commitment to honoring the vows they had made to each other all those years ago in the small church in Tanapa. In the spring of 1910, as they celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. There were now 6 grandchildren, with more on the way, and the house rang with laughter and noise and the beautiful chaos of family. As Sarah looked around at the faces of the people she loved, at the life she and Cole had built from the ashes of tragedy and loss, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and peace. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Sarah and Cole sat on their porch as they had done countless times before, holding hands and watching the stars emerge overhead. "I have been thinking about Thomas a lot lately," Sarah said, her voice soft in the darkness. "Wondering if he would be proud of what we have built, if he would think I honored his memory properly." Cole turned to look at her, his face illuminated by the soft glow of lamplight from inside the house. "Thomas would be more than proud, Sarah. He would be overjoyed. He asked me to make sure you were not left waiting, to care for you and support you, and I have done my best to fulfill that promise every single day of our marriage. But more than that, he would be proud of the woman you became, the strength you showed in rebuilding your life, the love and grace you have brought to everyone around you. You honored his memory by living fully and loving deeply, and that is the greatest tribute anyone could ask for." Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy and release. "Thank you for saying that. Thank you for keeping your promise so completely. Thank you for not just making sure I survived, but helping me truly live again. You are the best man I have ever known, Cole Henley, and I thank God every day that Thomas trusted you with my care." Cole pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her and holding her against his chest. "I am the one who should be grateful, Sarah. You took a broken man who felt responsible for your husband's death and gave him a reason to believe in redemption and second chances. You taught me what real love looks like: patient, kind, enduring, sacrificial. You made me a better man than I ever thought I could be, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." They sat together in the darkness, 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and had chosen to build a life together based on a promise made by a dying man to a stranger. Thomas had asked Cole not to leave Sarah waiting, and Cole had honored that promise so completely that it had transformed both of their lives in ways neither could have imagined. What had begun as a duty, an obligation to honor a final request, had become the greatest love story either of them had ever known. As the years continued to advance, Sarah and Cole aged with the same grace and dignity they had brought to every stage of their lives. Their hair turned silver, their movements slowed, but their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened and matured, becoming something rich and complex that went beyond mere passion or romance. They were 2 halves of a whole, so completely intertwined that it was difficult to tell where one ended and the other began. In 1918, as the Great War raged in Europe and the world seemed to be tearing itself apart, Sarah and Cole celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and now great-grandchildren. The ranch had been turned over to James years earlier, though Sarah and Cole still lived in the main house and remained active in the day-to-day operations. They were patriarchs of a sprawling family that included dozens of people, all of whom could trace their existence back to a promise made in a dying man's final moments, and kept by a man who understood that honor and integrity were worth more than gold. That night, after the celebrations had ended and they were finally alone, Sarah said, "I never thought I would live to see 76 years, much less that I would still be so happy at this age. But here I am, surrounded by people I love, living in a place I adore, married to a man who has made every single day of my life better just by being in it." Cole, now 78, smiled and pulled her close. "We have been blessed beyond measure, Sarah. We have built a good life together, raised good children, made a difference in the lives of the people around us. When I look back on everything we have accomplished, everything we have overcome, I am filled with gratitude and wonder. I kept a promise to Thomas all those years ago, and in doing so, I found everything I ever wanted and things I did not even know I needed." "Do you think Thomas is watching?" Sarah asked, a question she had wondered about for decades. "Do you think he knows what became of us, how his final act of love led to all of this?" "I do," Cole said with absolute certainty. "I think Thomas is at peace, knowing that his wife was cared for and loved, that his sacrifice led to something beautiful and lasting. I think he knows that I kept my promise not to leave you waiting, and that in keeping that promise, I gave you a life full of love and purpose and joy. And I think he approves of the choice we made to honor his memory by living fully rather than by dwelling in sorrow." Sarah nodded, feeling the truth of Cole's words settle into her heart. She had spent nearly 4 decades as Cole's wife, and while she would never forget Thomas or the brief time they had shared together, her life with Cole had been everything she could have hoped for and more. He had been her rock, her partner, her best friend, and the love of her life. He had kept his promise in ways large and small, refusing to let her drown in grief, offering her a hand to hold and a future to embrace. They grew old together with the same grace and love that had characterized their entire marriage. In their 80s, they spent their days sitting on the porch watching the ranch operate around them, holding hands and sharing memories of the decades they had spent together. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren came to visit regularly, filling the house with noise and laughter, and the continuation of the legacy Sarah and Cole had built together. On a warm spring morning in 1925, Cole Henley passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 85, with Sarah holding his hand and whispering words of love and gratitude into his ear. She mourned him deeply, but without the devastating grief that had nearly destroyed her when Thomas died, because this time she had been given the gift of a full life shared with a remarkable man. Cole had kept his promise to the very end, never leaving her waiting, never letting her doubt his love, always there with steady presence and unwavering support. Sarah lived another 3 years after Cole's death, spending her time with family and friends, writing letters to her numerous descendants, and recording the story of how she and Cole had found each other. She wanted future generations to know about the promise made in a mine shaft, and the man who had kept it so completely that it had changed the course of multiple lives. She wanted them to understand that love could bloom even in the darkest circumstances, that second chances were real and precious, and that keeping your word mattered more than almost anything else in life. On a cool evening in November of 1928, Sarah Preston Henley passed away surrounded by her children, her hand resting on a photograph of Cole that sat on her bedside table. She was 86 years old and had lived a life so full and rich that it seemed impossible to capture in mere words. She had known great love twice, had built an empire from nothing, had raised children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried her values forward into the world. At her funeral, attended by over 200 people, James stood before the assembled crowd and told the story his mother had written down, the story of a promise kept and a love found in the wake of tragedy. He spoke of Thomas Preston, the young man whose dying wish had set everything in motion. He spoke of Cole Henley, the honorable man who had traveled 300 miles in winter to keep a promise and had stayed to build a life. And he spoke of Sarah, the remarkable woman who had survived loss and grief and had chosen to embrace a second chance at happiness with courage and grace. "My mother wanted me to tell you all something," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "She wanted you to know that the greatest gift one person can give another is the refusal to let them face life alone. My father Cole promised a dying man that he would not leave my mother waiting, and he kept that promise every single day of their marriage. In doing so, he gave her a life full of love and purpose and belonging. And my mother, in turn, gave him the same. They built something beautiful together, something that continues in all of us who gather here today. That is their legacy, a promise kept, a love honored, and a family built on the foundation of integrity, compassion, and unwavering commitment to each other." As the funeral ended and the crowd dispersed, returning to their own lives and concerns, the story of Sarah and Cole lived on, passed down through generations as an example of what was possible when one person chose to keep a promise, when another chose to take a chance on love again, and when both committed themselves fully to building something beautiful and lasting together. Their ranch continued to operate for decades, run by descendants who remembered the values their ancestors had embodied. Their love story became legend in Tonopah, told and retold until it was difficult to separate fact from embellishment, though the core truth remained constant. A promise made was a promise kept, and from that simple act of honor had sprung a love that transcended time, tragedy, and even death itself.